topic today is how to migrate from a 2D CAD system to SOLIDWORKS like a pro. My name is Joelle Guinette. I am a territory manager for SOLIDWORKS, specifically at Dassault Systems. And I'm attributed to the Eastern territory or Eastern area of North America. And I have with me Michel Cloutier, who is a technical manager, who will be sharing a whole lot of great information with you today. So 2D, why do we still have 2D? 2D is where we started, right? Paper drawings is where we started, which is definitely a 2D format. And from there, the first CAD tools that came out were 2D, just to elaborate or help with automation and have better tools than doing it on paper, an easier way to modify things. Since then, we've introduced 3D. And it's taken the world of design to a whole new level. Obviously, what you're looking to draw are 3D models or parts or assemblies. Everything that you make is going to be in a 3D format. So there's obvious advantages to working in 3D. Some of them you just saw in the video that we played, if you were able to catch part of that video before we started the call. And we're going to go through some of examples of why you may want to look at 3D, what you may think about 3D that may be true or false, and how to get there. So obviously, if you're looking at this, it's because you've got 2D, you've got 2D files, and you're wondering, what would I do with all this data? And Michelle is going to take you through some examples to give you some ideas of what's possible and how that transition can be done a little bit more easily and effortlessly than you may think. So we'll walk you through some of those examples. We recognize that today you may be looking at 3D, not only because you want to look at 3D, but because the environment around you is kind of forcing you towards 3D, because it may be suppliers that you're dealing with that are more used to 3D, and it just facilitates communication with everyone else. So just to walk you through a few things of the webinar, there's a panel on your right-hand side of your window for GoToWebinar. If this is the first time for you using this, there's a little arrow, that's orange arrow that closes the window. You can do this by computer audio or phone audio. If you click on the phone option, it will give you the dial-in and the access code, so you can jump in on that. And then below that, there's some handouts that you can download. And there was a slide just 2 seconds ago that showed one of those handouts that illustrates some of the examples of why. So today, Michelle has taken some of the reasons or some aspects of switching to 3D, why it may be compelling, why it may be interesting. He's going to talk about those that he can demonstrate that are more visual. But of course, there's some reasons that are a little bit more theoretical. The fact that you can find employees easier, that you can collaborate with your suppliers. Some of these things are more things that you may want to just read through instead of us listing tons and tons of reasons on this PowerPoint presentation, which would bore all of you. So please, you can download those handouts at any time. And just below that, there's a chat area or a message or question area, whatever it's called on your panel. Please put in any questions that you may have in that area. If there's time at the end, we'd be happy to answer them or take them offline with you after the call. And with that, I'm going to switch it over to Michel. Michel's been with SOLIDWORKS for 14 years. So he's obviously a true in and out 3D user. This is what he lives and breathes every day. And we meet customers every week or talk to customers every week, and some of them are on 3D, some of them have 2D, some of them are on 3D and have 2D still in their company somewhere. So we always have conversations on how to best make use of that information and what can and can't be done with it. So with that, I will put you in his capable hands and come back to close the call at the end. Michel, over to you.
All right, well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. And so yeah, today we're going to talk about how to migrate from 2D to SOLIDWORKS, and it's kind of funny. It's a little bit like my personal work life. I actually learned mechanical engineering on AutoCAD 10 DOS over 20 years ago. So that kind of tells you a little bit about my age. But Actually, this year, 20 years ago, this year, that's when I transitioned from AutoCAD to SolidWorks. So we're going to walk you through some of the challenges and maybe misconception about converting from 2D to SolidWorks. Now, a couple of things, and you'll see some of those challenges and misconception in the documents that Joel just mentioned. So I'm going to talk about some of them today, some of the myths about converting to 3D. So I'm going to tackle 3 myths. First of all, 3D is too difficult. Second of all, we won't be able to use legacy data, and we'll lose our 2D tools. And then we're going to talk about some of the things you can do in 3D in SolidWorks, but you cannot do in 2D. So like things like animations, manufacturing, doing simulation and things like that. So let's start with the beginning. Some of the myths associated with SolidWorks or 3D in general. The first one is that it's too difficult. Like I said, I transitioned from a 2D world to SolidWorks 20 years ago, and that was pretty much before YouTube, right? So YouTube is a great resource, but there's tons of resource other than that. So first of all, if you're coming into SolidWorks for the first time, you might want to take a look at the tutorials. There's actually 56 of them installed with SolidWorks that you can just launch and try and go ahead. What's kind of interesting too is that we also have tutorials specifically focused for people transitioning from a 2D world like AutoCAD into SolidWorks. So we have focused tutorials for that, and those tutorials are just a great resource. Now, like I said, I learned SolidWorks before YouTube, and YouTube is a great resource to learn, but we've actually at SolidWorks came up and created our own website where we host all that resource, including links to YouTube's. It's called My SolidWorks. But additionally to all the content you can find there, we also have online tutorials that was created by the SolidWorks team. So anyone in the world with a free account can have access to about over 150 tutorials. If you are a SolidWorks customer on subscription, that number of tutorials gets over 280. And we do offer a professional subscription to My SolidWorks that gives you over 440 tutorials, online tutorials that you can access anywhere in the world. Now, those tutorials are in addition to whatever is already inside of SolidWorks, but additional to that, the training, the actual training. Again, on My SolidWorks, we do offer e-courses that are full-blown, training course. They're online. We got 17 of them. But in my opinion, nothing beats, in-class, instructor-led training, which all of our VARs and resellers do offer pretty much throughout the world. So I would encourage you to just reach out to a reseller and learn when there's their next basic training is and sign up for that. So when people say that 3D is too difficult, like I said, I made the transition 20 years ago. When the content was a lot thinner, there was a lot less material to help people. And I was able to do it. So today, it's even, I would say it's much easier to do that transition today than it was even in the past. Now, another misconception is that we will lose our 2D tools. So I'm going to talk about 2 tools that you can still use in combination with current legacy data, DWG legacy data. These tools are, first of all, eDrawings, which is a free viewer that you can download that will allow you to view, measure, even markup DWG files and other file types. And another one is DraftSite that, for a fraction of the cost of AutoCAD, gets you the ability to actually create and edit DWG files. So let's take a look at both of these for a quick sec. So first of all, eDrawings. So inside of eDrawings, I have this DWG file open. So you're probably asking, what file formats can we actually open inside of eDrawings? Well, we have a full list. So I'm working with the DWG files here. But as you can see, eDrawings is a CAD viewer, general CAD viewer. So it will open up SOLIDWORKS files, obviously, but also files from other vendors listed here. So, and as you open a DWG file, well, it's a full-blown viewer, but has additional functionality. So for example, I can actually go ahead and measure directly on this DWG file, right? So very useful when you just want to pick some dimensions out of this file. The other thing we can do with eDrawings is markup. So we have a full suite of markup tools. And here I'm going to simply add a quick markup and say that I want to change this dimension to 6 inches. Click OK. So I got a full-blown suite of markup tools, and I can actually save these back into the DWG file itself or as a separate markup file. And also, one of the tools I like to mention is the stamps. So I can actually create and add my own stamps in my drawings and save those stamps back into the DWG file. So eDrawings is a great tool to just, a great CAD viewer in general, not only AutoCAD and SOLIDWORKS file, but pretty much every file types, every CAD file that's around there. Now, the other tool I want to show is DraftSite that you can use to create new drawings or edit existing one. So here I'm going to use a plant layout, a DWG file, and I want to do some changes. Now, what's really nice about DraftSite is that the commands are pretty much the same as AutoCAD. Well, they are the same as AutoCAD. Like I said, I learned AutoCAD 10 on DOS, so I got very familiar with the command line. So the same command line applies. I want to insert a block, I enter, I type I on the keyboard, enter. I can navigate to where my DWG block is. I'm gonna pick this skid that I wanna insert into my plant layout. I say open. I wanna position it, so I'll drop it over here. Let's just zoom in, drop it over here. So I want to orient it. So you see now I got the orthogonal on and off that I can turn on or off using the F8 shortcut, same as AutoCAD. So I'm gonna drop it over here. And I realized that I've got a piping line that's coming out here. I wanna make sure that I avoid the stairwell. So L enter creates a line, and I'm simply going to draw a line just to make sure that I clear that stairwell. If I want to simply move it, I can simply drag and drop. Let's put it over here. I think that's going to be pretty good. Let's just delete this line. Now, as I do a zoom extend, I see that there's also a lot of content in here. I don't want to filter that using my layers because I want to reuse that inside of SOLIDWORKS a little later on. So using my layer manager, I have access to all the layers created inside of AutoCAD or DraftSite. I can select them, shift select them. I want to freeze these one here just to simplify my layout drawing and click OK. So now I only have the profiles of the buildings for this big plant layout. Now what I'm going to do here is do a save as, and I'm going to override this one here called plant layout modified, and I'm going to repurpose that a little later on inside of SOLIDWORKS directly. So let me just save and overwrite, and we'll close back DraftSite. We're going to be working on SOLIDWORKS next. So when people say, hey, I'm losing access to my 2D tools, I mean, that's not true. You can still continue working with your, legacy AutoCAD files. eDrawings is a great viewer when you just want to navigate and open up a drawing, do a measurement or a mockup. This is a great tool. And then DraftSite that you can use to replace AutoCAD and with a fraction of the cost. Now, the next topic is, a lot of the the next myth is that people think that you can't reuse legacy data. And I'll actually show how we can actually reuse DWG data or 2D AutoCAD data two different ways. So first of all, I'm going to use an example where I want to reuse data simply as a reference. And I'm going to use the plant layout for that. And then another example where I want to actually take like a AutoCAD drawing and recreate a 3D model from that drawing. So let's step inside of SOLIDWORKS. And I'm going to navigate to my folder where I have my plant layout, which is here. So I got my plant layout mod. So I'm simply going to open that DWG file. So SOLIDWORKS can easily open DWG files. And here with this wizard, I'm going to say I want to import this as a 2D sketch and import as reference. The import as reference is actually a new option in SOLIDWORKS 2020, really useful for large layout designs like this one. I'm going to set my units. So originally I designed this layout in millimeters. You see I got all my layers listed here. So even though I turned them off, I froze them inside of DraftSight or inside of AutoCAD, I could actually turn them back on here if I wanted them. So for now, I'm simply going to go ahead with that, hit finish. SOLIDWORKS prompts me and asks me, do I want to explode my blocks? So SOLIDWORKS actually understands and can create blocks just like AutoCAD as well. So I got my layout here, and I realize if I orient this that the orientation isn't really great if I go in isometric. So I want to change where this is actually being positioned. So I'm going to do a quick edit here and say this should not be sitting on the front plane, actually should be sitting on the top plane. So just reorienting really quickly in my 3D space. So I got my 2D elements, but in a 3D space. Like I said, I want to repurpose that to recreate my plant layout. So I'm going to select my sketch and recreate the property or the contour of the property. So I'm going to select the contour, the outside profile. I'm going to say it's 3 meters, about 10 feet, 9 feet or so, and just do a quick offset like this. So that's actually the property of this plant. Now, again, I'm going to be repurposing this sketch quite a bit. So I'm basically just referencing it to create new geometry. Next step, I want to create the outside fence. So there's a little fence outside the property. So I'm going to select the contour over here. That's going to be a thin feature. And then again, I'm going to repurpose that to simply remove some material, which would be where the asphalt is. And that's the contour here. So I'm going to simply say through all, click OK. And very quickly, I've created this property layout for that I'm going to be dropping buildings on just shortly after. Now, one thing I want to do here is maybe make that look a little bit more like an actual property. So inside of SOLIDWORKS, I could come in and say, hey, I want to have some, I want this to actually look like it's grass. So I'm going to simply drop it over my property. Then I can use my scale option to just make it, a little denser, or make it look like this. Next, I want to use some paving. I want to recreate the paving here. So I'm simply going to, again, drag and drop for my properties and do something like this. So very quickly now it actually looks like the property of a plant layout. So I'm going to save that. Actually going to overwrite the property layout I already had created here. Save this, and now I want to actually start putting the buildings. Again, referencing the AutoCAD data that's underlying this model to position my buildings. So from here, I'm going to make a new assembly from this part. And I'm going to select the layout of the property as my first part. Let's go ahead and save that assembly. That's going to be my power plant. Let's go ahead and save that and start bringing in some buildings. So one of the main building that I do have here, so I'm going to select that main building. Say I want to open it inside of this and bring it in. So very quickly I got it in. If we want to take a peek inside, we could actually change the transparency of the outside building. So you see it's a full-blown building with all the structural steel elements in there. Now, one thing that you might have noticed on my original drawing, my AutoCAD drawing, is that there's actually a reference for the origin of this building. So I can select it and say that I want to attach or mate in our lingo the origin of this building and align the axes so the XYZ are the same. And very quickly, I've put in the building in on top of my AutoCAD drawing, basically, but in a 3D, in this 3D environment. Now, other methods that we can actually tie buildings or position buildings like this, let's bring in another one. So I'm going to browse to these cooling towers, say that I want to open them, maybe drop one here. Now, again, I want to position these. So I'm going to turn on my planes, and you'll see that this building has planes that I can select and repurpose over here. So I'm going to select both of the top planes, so they're coincident. So basically, I'm making this building, putting this building at ground level. But then, if you look at the original underlying AutoCAD data, I got some lines here that represents the middle, or if you would split the building, that position. So I can control, select, say I want this to be coincident. I want this one here to be coincident as well. And very quickly, I've positioned my building inside my property. So what's great here is that even though I've got 2D data, I can repurpose that 2D data here, and we can still see the original 2D data in as form as a sketch. And I can repurpose that and simply use that as a reference to put my buildings inside of this 3D environment. So this is one method you can actually repurpose your AutoCAD data, is to use it as a reference to do some layout like I just did for a plant design. Another method, we can use AutoCAD data, and this time I'm going to repurpose the other drawing you saw me use earlier, this drawing I used with eDrawings. I opened up with eDrawings. I'm going to open this up inside of SOLIDWORKS, but this time I want to recreate a 3D model. So I'm going to, again, import this as a sketch. It is in inches. It was designed in inches originally. I want to import the dimensions though. So this is going to be useful for me because I do want to have the dimensions that I can edit, and I will filter out some of the layers that I don't need. So I just want to keep the geometry layers and the center line and the dimensions. So you'll see that all of that information is viewable from the preview before I do anything. When I'm happy with the output or the selection, I hit finish. SOLIDWORKS will again prompt me if I want to do explode the blocks. I'll say no for that. I want to keep them as SOLIDWORKS blocks. And this is being imported now inside of SOLIDWORKS, but the entities different from my first layout where I simply use the layout as a reference and put stuff on top of it for positional information. This one here I want to change. I want to do some changes. Now you probably realize that the dimensions are off. That's simply because my SOLIDWORKS template is in millimeters. So let's put it back in inches. Doing that, you see very quickly that all my dimensions are in inches. And one thing I want to do here is that I want to recreate that model, but I see that the fillets here on top here needs to be taken care of. So if I just do a revolve, it won't be a functional functional thread. So what I'll do here is I'll actually remodel this a little bit. So use the L key on the keyboard to draw a line, just like AutoCAD, by the way. I'm going to use my trim extend tool. Works very similar to AutoCAD, so I can extend and trim in the same tool. Once I've defined this profile, I want to create a circular or revolve feature. So I'm going to select my revolve. The center for the revolve is going to be the center line, and I'm actually going to use this contour. Really quick to do, and I've got my part. Now, as I said, I took out the threads on the outside face here because I wanted to recreate functional thread. And lucky for me, inside of SOLIDWORKS, we have such a tool. So I'm going to say that I want to create a thread from this edge, and I want this thread to go all the way through this edge. And I'm purposefully selecting an edge that's outside of my end face, if you want, just to make sure that my thread actually completes and goes off of, completes the thread feature. The other thing too is I'm going to do an offset on the other end, just making sure again that this thread completes and cuts through the part completely. So you see, that's why I got a couple threads outside here, just making sure that this, I got a full thread on this face. Now I can select my different standards. I got one here specifically for this type of tool, and I click OK, and this creates my thread on my part. And this is a real functional thread. So I could bring it to a machine, I could 3D print it, and it would be a full functional thread. Now the last thing I want to do here, and if I circle back to my 2D file, we see that we have some cuts all around that face. We got 8 of them for basically a hex socket to go in and be able to unscrew the whole part. Now, when I look from the front, I can see that here from that cutout here that's represented here. So I'm going to repurpose that. Select these 2 lines and simply convert those into sketch entities. Once I've got this, I want to cut extrude both sides, both directions, and click OK. So now I've got this, one of those cutouts created. But if you're familiar with AutoCAD, you do a lot of arrays or patterns inside of AutoCAD. So we do have the same functionality here. So I could say I want to have a circular pattern. This is the feature I'm going to repeat. And I select a circular face or an edge or a dimension to define where about the axis. I'm going to say 360 degrees, equally spaced, 8 of them. So I could change, you see the live preview that updates, click OK. And basically, I've very quickly recreated this model that's now pretty much ready for manufacturing. So as you see here, when people think that you can't reuse or repurpose all that legacy data that you had created inside of AutoCAD or another 2D legacy system, you can clearly see there's actually a few ways you can do that. I've shown you 2. How to use a simple, like a layout scale or layout drawing, and simply bring that inside of SOLIDWORKS and start putting on your 3D buildings or equipment on top of a layout. So you just use it as a reference. But if you want to recreate a 3D file from a 2D drawing, we can also do that. We've got tools inside of SOLIDWORKS to automate that process. Now, we talked about some of the myth about going to 3D. Let's talk about some of the things you want to do, but you just can't in 2D. Um, Things like animations, things like doing simulation of physical products to see if they're strong enough, if they're going to survive stresses and whatnot. Um, Take designs directly to manufacturing. You have this part, the part I showed, you want to send it to manufacturing, or maybe you want to send it to a 3D printer to have a functional prototype, or even a functional part. 3D printers now do a lot of metals that can actually create functioning, metal parts. So let's take a look at this example here where I got this design inside of SOLIDWORKS. I want to create some renderings for my marketing, for my sales team. I take that design, I bring it in SOLIDWORKS Visualize. It comes in with the same colors and appearances that SOLIDWORKS had. But now inside of Visualize, I can tweak those. I can set, different appearances on different parts. It's a simple drag and drop. We've got hundreds of those appearances in online libraries. You can create your own as well if you want. But you got a lot more control over the visual appeal of this model now. And you can create some really high-end, high quality renderings. The beauty with Visualize is that every time you do a change, you can actually see that change live before your eyes, before you actually output the finished rendering. We got different camera options. We can also set depth of field. We can create animations as well inside of Visualize Professional. Just a great tool to create this high-end quality, photo rendering that you can repurpose for sales, for marketing activities, and whatnot. Another thing that we want to do in 3D that we can do in 3D, but you can't do in AutoCAD, is to validate and optimize performances of those designs without having to create a physical prototype. So here I got an example using a jaws of life. So those of first responders going to car accident have those to help people out of their cars. So as you can imagine, it has to be very sturdy. Also has to be very strong because they use them to pry open doors from a car. So inside of SOLIDWORKS, even though I don't have any 3D geometry, I can actually start simulating, forces, the force I need to open up these jaws, depending on the countering force. But then when we get into a 3D model, I can start doing a lot more of those simulations. So here I've basically got a virtual jig for testing this device. And I'm setting the software to say, hey, there's a certain amount of force and I need to open these two parts. Now I can actually simulate the amount of required horsepower or whatever I need to actually be able to spread open these jaws. Now what's great is that I can get reaction forces of moving components like this, so do some kinematic simulation. But from here, I could actually push that back into the 3D model and do some FEA analysis. So now, if you look at these jaws, you see the color code on it. So I'm actually looking at a stress distribution of these forces within the part. So now I can predictively say or tell if this part is going to survive or not in this loading condition. Here I got another example using the cover. So I'm gonna simply lock in the cover as if simulate that it's bolted in place using those 4 small holes, and you see the green arrows on the screen here. And then I'm going to simulate a force on the back faces of these the other 2 mounting points, and I'm going to run a simulation. So without having to create any physical prototype, I can actually simulate that right inside of my SOLIDWORKS environment, look at factor of safety distribution to see if there's any weak points on this part, and also a stress and deformation, what we call plots. But we can even go further than that. Let's say that, because it's a handheld equipment, weight is important, but it also has to survive, the forces I'm subjecting it to. So using SolidWorks, we can optimize the design. So we can optimize the design to have the most efficient, weight to performance ratio. So we can all do that right inside of SolidWorks, and SolidWorks will come up with the best design, the best solution idea for this product, and simulate all of that inside of SolidWorks. Now we're talking about simulation, but another big area where we can repurpose, 3D data and where it's very difficult to do with 2D data is manufacturing. So let's say I've got a part here and I want to send that to the milling. Now, if you're doing sheet metal, you will say that you can repurpose the XF. I grant you that. But what about milling and turning? So here I got a part designed inside of SolidWorks. I go inside of SolidWorks CAM, and SolidWorks CAM understands the 3D model and creates my setup, my tooling path, my machining operations. I could go in and do some of those operations manually if I want and define that, on that face, I want to have a rough finish machining strategy. But then once you do that, you can actually simulate your tool path right inside of SolidWorks. So you understand now very nicely, if my tool is going to hit, the jigs for the supports, for example. But I can also added benefit to SolidWorks is that if I change the 3D model, because everything is integrated inside of SolidWorks, well, guess what? If I change the model and change the size, I can simply update my tool path, update my CAM simulation, and run that directly inside of SolidWorks. So everything is nicely integrated. And another example is with 3D printing. And actually, the model I showed you a little bit earlier, I'm fortunate enough to have a small 3D printer. So I actually printed this part on my 3D printer, and that's actually what you're seeing there is actually the a bit of a clip of when it was printing. But I couldn't send this as a drawing, a 2D drawing to my printer. I need to have a 3D model. And very quickly, it's a matter of minutes really to start printing this from a 3D model. So now I have a physical prototype. I can come in on the field, see if it fits, see if it works. And some 3D printers today actually print high strength metals that are usable in working environment. This is just a plastic one as a prototype, but 3D printing has evolved greatly, and now with a 3D model, it's very easy to go from my 3D model to a 3D print. Very, very easy. So these are the things that we want to do we can do inside of SolidWorks, but you just can't do inside of a 2D drafting environment. So you can't create animations or photorealistic renderings. We can do that inside of SolidWorks. We can validate and optimize using our simulation tools. We can actually send that straight to manufacturing using SolidWorks CAM or other CAM software. And of course, 3D printing. I mean, you can leverage your 3D models for 3D printing using SolidWorks. So hopefully this gives you a good overview of what we can do inside of SolidWorks. I covered some of the myths and tried to debunk some of those myths about 3D. So 3D is easier than you think. You can still use your current 2D tools in combination with 3D. That's still possible. We have tools to support your 2D workflows and data, but we can also leverage all of that information into a 3D model. And I showed you two examples. Simply use it as a reference, for example, a layout, or take a 2D drawing that I had in AutoCAD and convert that into a 3D model that I can print. And then, there's all the other advantages of going to 3D. The ability to create animations and renderings, the ability to do simulation, real life simulation, the ability to take those designs to manufacturing using SOLIDWORKS CAM, for example, or send them to 3D printing. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the possibilities when you're in a legacy 2D CAD system and you want to go to 3D, what you can do, and maybe break some of the misconceptions about going to 3D. This is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on our page a little later today. So if you want to review or share the recording, you'll get an email tomorrow, I believe, with the link for that. That's actually the QR code if you want to take a peek there now. Our next session we're planning is actually next week, 1 week from now, at the same time, where we're going to talk about how to convert not 2D data to SOLIDWORKS, but 3D data to SOLIDWORKS. So if you're receiving a lot of 3D data and you want to bring them inside of SOLIDWORKS, you might learn a few tips. If you're on another 3D system and you're looking at SOLIDWORKS, hopefully this session is going to be informative and help you make a decision if you should go or not, and how easy it can be to actually go from one platform to another. Now, because it is launch season and we just released SOLIDWORKS 2020, I do want to make a last comment, the last promo about the SOLIDWORKS 2020. I was actually running SOLIDWORKS 2020 that was just released 2 days ago, I believe. So it's hot, it's fresh, but there's tons of new enhancements. So I encourage you to reach out to your resellers, or you can look at the SOLIDWORKS website to get a peek of some of those enhancements. But if you want to see it live, I highly recommend attending a launch session hosted by any of our resellers across the world. So on that, I am going to switch it back to Joelle for the closing words.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michel. Actually, were there any questions during the session?
No questions.
Anyone?
Nope.
No questions. Is crystal clear, as always, with you, Michel. So appreciate the information that you shared with us. As Michel covered, a lot of information from myths to how-tos and what's possible, and then what's only possible when you're working in 3D. So hopefully it gets you thinking about those options, what it can do for you, your company, in terms of improving your product, your quality, your turnaround time, your connection from your sales process to your marketing on your website to your customer satisfaction in the product, all the way through to manufacturing. So we hope you got to see a sneak peek of that. Obviously, the full solution of SOLIDWORKS has a lot to offer that you can see either from the web page that you're going to get a link to, where all the recordings to our webinars sit. So feel free to see them, to share them. And obviously, you've got our contact information there. And you will be getting a follow-on call from a reseller, so please feel free to ask some questions on how any of this may pertain specifically to you to do a deeper dive and see how SOLIDWORKS can help you today. And with that, we will leave you with a little snapshot video from our 2020 launch, give you a little sneak peek of what that looks like, and hope to see you on another webinar, maybe the one next week. Have a great day, everyone. Bye for now.
All right. Thank you. Bye.